Yakima Valley Flavor King. And, that's kind of the theme of our tour for the next day and a half. The Yakima Valley grows over 30% of the state's wine grapes here in the valley. We grow 70% of the nation's hops. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And we grow, I don't know how much of the apples. 95% of the organic apples in the United States are grown in this region. And about 80%, 70% of the apples. So, has she been prepping you guys? It's our study groups going on there. But, and those are just 3 of the agricultural products that we grow here. This is an agricultural mecca. Our climates, our soils, the slopes, just the soils, I already said that, just really makes it exceptional for growing a lot of different agricultural products. So we chose to look at the craft beverage side of things, and that's the hops, the apples that make the ciders, and of course the wine grapes that go into our wines. So we've broken you out into teams. There's 3 teams. So hopefully you've seen it. We've got the hopsters. So we're going to have the hopsters stay together. And your first, we'll send you to the first tent here. That's going to be your first site. And so we're going to have you guys go through a session on hops and beer. And then we have the bittersweets. And that is the cider.
Oh, yeah.
And so cider is the second over. So we'll have you guys stay together in your rotation and start over in the far tent. And then we have the whole clusters. And that group is going to go with David. And we've got a Pinsgauer here, so we'll have everybody load into the Pinsgauer and take a tour of the vineyards, sample some wine, learn about the Yakima Valley's vineyards. That we do have one pedestrian behind the Pinsgauer, though, so that's okay back here. I'm still convinced you're walking. So what we're going to do is you're going to go through your classroom setting, and each of your instructors are going to have 3 questions for you during the course or at the conclusion of your classroom setting. And as a team, you can collaborate and come up with the answer. And if you get the answer right, then you get $100 for the team. So you have an opportunity to earn at least $900 during your educational sessions today. And then tomorrow we'll have a couple more opportunities. And at the end, before we send you off to Walla Walla, the team with the most money gets to win the prize. The grand prize at the end of the weekend, at the end of the days. So as soon as you get together, you'll need to decide who's your banker. Who's going to be the banker that's going to keep track of the money. No funny money, no funny banking, $900 on the table today. And tonight, depending on how things go, we may have some camp-style games that could generate a little bit more money. But we'll see how it goes. Does anybody have any questions?
That's exactly probably what he's thinking.
So, do we want to have all the glasses? Do you want to take the glasses with you, or do you want to set them down, or?
You tell
us.
You
guys need glasses, Marcus?
No, they've got glasses.
Okay.
And so, during this, I'm going to throw out some facts at the very end, and we'll do the quiz. Hey, so who's your banker?
Who looks good?
This guy.
No. I got 2 glasses of wine. That's how good I am. Oh. No.
So yes, just we can talk. So basically,
she looks intelligent. What's your name? What's your name?
I have a bag.
Yeah. Oh, she's got a bag of money already.
I'm unlikely to lose it. If that's
Stacy,
Stacy back. Good job. Thank you, Stacy.
So you can see we have, on this property, we have 10 acres of cherries.
Got it.
And the cherries are planted on very deep soil. And so basically what you'll see in Yakima Valley is, kind of a slow gradation of crops from the kind of the deep soils and the valley floor. And as you kind of climb up off the valley floor and out of the kind of the moist areas around the Yakima River. It used to be the case before irrigation, they would not be, planting wine grapes up here, and so everything would have to be, they would have pumps and cisterns, and then they would do gravity down into the vineyards, and then down below where there's deep soils, they would just, kind of flood irrigate for apples, cherries. So these are cherries. Cherries tend to bloom early, and so they're off the valley floor, or else they can get frosted out. And we do have one wind machine in here. As you came you're all out of Pasco today.
Yes.
So Pasco is down towards Red Mountain, and so the elevation of Pasco is about 270 to 300 feet, whereas we're almost 1,000 feet higher. So our house up in the hill is about 1,320. So you gained 1,000 feet elevation. And what's really fascinating about this area is that if you, we're not marine. There's no coastal influence like Napa, Sonoma, even the Central Coast or the Willamette Valley. There's no coastal influence at all. So our biggest differentiation is elevation. And if you're on the valley floor, those soils tend to stay cold. So this is a perfect time to go see it. I have a weather station map, and I see all the weather stations throughout in eastern Washington. And the one that's here is about 400 feet lower elevation than we are. And last night that was at 47 degrees. Whereas Nacho here, at his house this morning, it was 30. Ooh. Now, 47 to 30 is huge. Yeah. Susan, you can keep on going. Thank you. And so 47 to 30 is massive. At 30 degrees, you're basically, now you're going to lose the chlorophyll in your leaf, and the vines are going to shut down. And so as you climb the hill here, you're going to get off kind of deep river, bottom clay soils. And what's really unique here, there's 3 main soil types in this area. And so there's one that we're going to walk into a little bit. It's called loess, Loess, and that's what this is. It's windswept ash and dust, and it's really loose. And so you'll see it when we walk into it, and it kicks up a lot of dust.
LOESS.
So that's the overlay. You're going to be in Walla Walla, and those deep soils in Walla Walla are all loess soils, and they tend to be valley floor, and that's where all that kind of volcanic ash and dust and silica, will you kind of settle down to that lower level. And then when you get here on this particular property, between 900 and about 1150, you get into the glacial soils. And so those are the flood debris. And so at Wallula Gap, which is down towards Walla Walla, and hopefully they'll point it out to you when you head down that way. That was basically the very top of that is 1,250 feet, and that's where all these glacial floods would come down. And they think maybe 40, maybe 50, maybe even 100 times that these ice dams in northern British Columbia, eastern Washington, and Idaho would build up and give way. And I'm not a geologist, and I've been told that it was to the volume of all the Great Lakes put together that would come down, and this terrific speed and this height of this massive height started out originally at about 2,000 feet, and it would by the time it hit the gap, it was 1,250 feet, and it would back up into Yakima Valley to about the depth of 1,150 feet. So let's hop over here.
So how did it drain out?
Well, let's hop out.
Because you said it did that like 20 times.
And
I take my seatbelt off. It works.
And so what happens slowly goes out because that gas itself down there at the
Thanks.
river.
You're
is
very
300
welcome.
feet. So just it has to slowly go up, but it's just such a massive amount of water. Okay, follow me, and make sure you have a wine glass.
It did something. I hit something.
And I don't trust Stacy here, so I'm going to keep the
So
money.
just hit menu,
I don't trust you at all. Thank you.
so then you hit it again.
And it'll keep recording.
Oh, it's recording now.
Okay, good.
Okay, so follow me here. Everything that is the highest elevation are the grapes here in the vineyard that ripen the latest. And so on this part of the property, we have down at the bottom, we have some of the glacial material, and then if you have, when you go down there, check on your altimeter on your phone, and you can see that down at the bottom, close to where the winery is around 1,100 feet. So then remember, 1,150 is kind of like the high water mark of where the glacial floods would be. And then when you get above there, at anywhere, especially around 1,200 feet, you'll see some ancient soils and a little bit of that overlay, that lost soil. So let's take a look over here. And so unfortunately, you will see very few grapes on the vineyard. So you're going to see grapes on your tour, and but one of the things that's really fascinating about this part of the valley is, as I was saying, we're 1,000 feet higher than the base of Red Mountain, and what happens here is that the cool night air rushes down. We tend to be much warmer here at night than lower elevation vineyards, and so what happens is, as you now are well off the valley floor and your soils are very thin, it doesn't require a lot of thermal energy to warm up those soils, and especially if they're warm at night. And so as a result, when the sun is hitting these vines at 5:30 in the morning in the summertime, you have maximum photosynthesis, because photosynthesis really starts to kick into gear at about 65 degrees Fahrenheit. And it's not uncommon for our soils here not to drop below kind of the upper 70s, 78, 80 degrees. And so I have in our other vineyard, we have temperature probes, and I can actually, I'm such a geek, I go on there and I want to see when that soil temperature starts to drop. Susan, our koi pond, dropped below 68 degrees this morning for the first time since May.
Oh my goodness.
Is that why? Because what happens is they only eat when it's and they physically don't eat below 60 degrees. So they wanted to eat, but they're not eating nearly as much now.
They were voracious before.
Yeah, isn't that amazing? So here, you see this soil here. This is loess.
How do you spell that again?
Loess.
Loess.
Yes. So it's not lust.
Okay.
I mean,
I don't
it's great
have
to
to
walk
remember
into it because you can see what happens is you touch this with water, it actually develops a little bit of kind of a clay type character. And I have Syrah grown on this soil, on straight lust soil, and it's primarily the blocks of Syrah that go into our ex-umbra Syrah. So we're going to pour that a little later. And I thought the last one we taste is one grown on the rocky soils, and you can see the difference between them. This is higher pH, and as a result, the wines tend to be a little lusher, a little more approachable, but maybe not as fragrant, not as aromatic. Oh yeah, hey, I guess we should probably bring the wine.
Don't forget that.
I think Susan just said that.
Pretty.
You were told that this was going to be a working vineyard, right?
Yes. We're gonna see you work.
So I just, my altimeter is just trying to, right now, if I step down here, it's showing 1,207, 1,208 feet. So we are above the glacial flood line. And if you take a look right over here, see the rocky material? So that is ancient soils. And so it's basalt. The subsoil here is rock. So what we have done, it's a very kind of a shallow overlay of loess onto basalt. And so if you have a grape variety here that really requires, you know, a lot of kind of rich soils, it's not a good grape for this soil. So what we've done here is we've planted only the Bordeaux varieties on this shallow soil. And as we've climbed up from the bottom to here, we've planted Cabernet Sauvignon. And so what we have here, we're actually going to do the vineyard blend. So this is a blend of Cabernet Sauvignon, which is here, Cabernet Franc, and we're going to taste the straight Cabernet Franc next. And then it's got Merlot and a little bit of Malbec, all from the coast. So come on over and we'll pour these for you. Which vineyard is this?
Oh,
It's 2016.
Here, have this one. He won't do it anyway. It's fine.
Well, these grapes here on this block were picked.
Thank you.
When did we pick this one?
That's good. Thank
This
you.
is last week. Yeah, we picked this.
Got blend.
Isn't it beautiful?
This is the one I liked. And I had Wilgo.
You know, if it's really raining in Seattle, sometimes the clouds will cover Mount Adams. But it's important to note that, I mean, the difference in rainfall between even here and Walla Walla is substantial. We get about 5 inches of rain here a year. 5 inches.
Wow.
And half of that is in the form of snow.
No,
Yeah.
quite different from Seattle.
We also we farm this vineyard organically, so you know sustainability is a big part of Eastern Washington agriculture because we don't have you know the sort of mildew pressures that we might have in areas with a lot more rain. We just don't need this. And if you were here yesterday, was anyone here yesterday?
Medium plus tannins.
It was windy.
Oh yeah, we were.
Was
Yeah.
it windy?
Yeah. I got video of it. Yeah.
But we get wind. I mean, even right now, we get
Nice dark fruit, dark
But
fruit.
at nighttime, and especially with that differential between here and East Washington, it blows all the time. And as a result, if you even get a little bit of moisture, that natural dry air is going to dry up the plant. And so, you know, our humidity in the summertime, I mean, it's not uncommon for us to be
Oh, yeah.
only single digit, even
This is an A for me.
So
I
this,
really like
what I love about you know the
Oh.
vineyard here is from a winemaker.
Mount Adams
you
in
know,
the
you get to work
distance.
with these different wines. And the wine in your glass is all from this soil type on the salt, and tends to be you know it tends to be a little rugged. There's some real firm tannins in here, but you know as you can see it's a relatively early ripening site, again with our elevation, and as a result you can still let these grapes hang, and then with our you know huge day-night temperature swings, you know this retains acidity. This is from the 14 vintage, which is a very warm year.
What does this retail for?
For you, I give you a good deal.
Okay, in general.
Hey, where's the banker? So this is what 85. 85. Yeah. So if you don't mind getting your feet a little more dirty, we're going to walk straight on down. Let's do this. Let's leave the 2 bottles here.
That's very nice.
Okay, we're going to
Very
walk
good.
down to the next block. Hold it. You can toss that wine out. But
$85? No.
and we're going to walk down through the end. If you don't want to get that less dirt all over your feet, you can walk closer in or, you know, to the line.
Where did you go, Tom Joe? Can you take a video of?
About 8 barrels.
Thanks. That's just amazing. I've never seen a vineyard, you know?
So
Interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Take it of me walking in my shoes. Yeah.
Oh, man.
Ready?
Yeah. Oh, the video?
Yeah, the video.
Hang on.
Yeah.
Ow. Okay.
Ready?
Oh, I got it.
No?
Hang on. Oh, hang on. Wait there. I can't see. Okay, go ahead.
Ready?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, let's get up there. Missing all the good stuff.
having your own thing is you get to, you know, you get to really kind of pick and choose which grape you want on which aspect. And for example, you know, this Cabernet Sauvignon behind you here is the same clone as this Cabernet Sauvignon, but it's west facing. And the west facing hillsides, you know, get a lot, I mean, you think about how far north we are. And, you know, we're on the 46th parallel, and, you know, the sun hangs here in the sky until it's really late at night. So it's the hottest part of the day, and, you know, often in the summertime it's 8 o'clock at night. And so it's just these vines just bake, and you know, the Cabernet tends to be a lot more tannic. Whereas the east-west, you can kind of block, you know, using leaves, you can block a little bit of that west-facing hillside. And so, you know, usually if you want, you know, if you want a more rugged wine, you'll plant, you know, east-west. And if you want something that you can kind of control a little, you go north-south. But a lot of it just depends on, you know, the terrain. So we actually had, the reason why you can see those end posts in there, we were really nervous. This was actually all north-south, and we were afraid that we would lose someone on the tractor. We ripped out the block, and we planted it east-west. So what we have in here is, down at the bottom, when you tasted that Bordeaux blend, there's Merlot. And as you climb the hill, so the Merlot is grown on deeper soils. It's, you know, again, it's right at that, you know, that 1,100 foot level. So it's below 1,150. So you have a lot of the glacial material in there, and you know, it can be fairly rich. And so as you climb the hill again, you get more shallow soils. And so what happens is Merlot ripens early. And it can, you know, if those soils get cold at all, it doesn't matter because, you know, it's the vines, you know, they're off the vines. And as you climb, we planted the next early ripening grape is Cabernet Franc. And that's what we have in this hillside right here. And so we're going to taste the Cabernet Franc. It's right over here. And the wine you're going to taste is right from these, you know, 100% Cabernet Franc from these vines right here. And we do a lot of work with the, you know, with the vines. I got to keep an eye on time because we have a time limit. But,
We don't.
I know, but you have 2 other seminars to go through after this.
Oh.
So,
Lauren?
is it true that owning the land and the winery is a little less common in this area? That there are less, is that changing?
No,
Yeah,
no,
okay.
it's definitely not the most common. In fact, you know, the funny thing is most wines
It smells like candy.
from Yakima Valley are not made in Yakima Valley. They're made in Woodinville
Okay.
in eastern Washington or in western Washington. Because then, you know, those winemakers have the, you know, they're living in Seattle's fun.
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
you know, we're old. Our kids are, you know, they love running around the hillsides here. So for me, I wanted to be real. And you know, I'm from Ireland. I love the fact of growing things, and I wanted to be here. I wanted to live and experience this hillside to really, you know, determine what, you know, we wanted to do.
How long have you been doing?
I've been doing this for 30 years. Yeah, I couldn't be gainfully employed, so I needed to start my own winery.
Who's Patrick to you?
Pardon me?
Who's Patrick to you?
The driver? Yeah, he was born in Northern Ireland too.
Londonderry.
Did you know that? He's from
did
Derry.
indeed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And another poet.
Is he?
Yeah, he was like,
So this is
poetry to us in the dark.
Isn't that great?
Yeah.
So this is Cabernet Franc. So Cabernet Franc ripens slightly later than Merlot, but before Cabernet Sauvignon. It doesn't require the heat intensity. And in a year like 2018 that was incredibly hot, this was a difficult grape to grow because I think of all the grape varieties that we grow on this property, and certainly of all the Bordeaux grape varieties, this is the one that's most sensitive to heat. And it's an ancient grape. It predates, it's one of the parents of Cabernet Sauvignon. The Cabernet Franc and Sauvignon Blanc are the parents of Cabernet Sauvignon. And it's an interesting little anecdote. So Aristotle believed that, have you heard this, Susan?
I believe so.
Aristotle believed that the most noble grapes were the ones that had a white parent and a black parent. So black was supposed to be masculine and male, and white was feminine. And so the monks believed that, and so they would only, cross-pollinate white and black. And that's how Cabernet Sauvignon came, which is really interesting because it ripens later than either one of those two grape varieties. It just shows you that your kids are not you. In case you didn't know.
Susan, he drank mine.
When was your first
For this
We're
particular
sharing.
wine, this was planted in
Okay, always can ask me for
Thank
more.
you.
So
To give
we've
you
been
more of
making
my favorite wine.
We're gonna, because we're on a bit of a time frame, you can
Take a
because
picture
you
of
asked,
his
we're
name
gonna go
tag
up and
if
around.
you haven't already done that.
We're ready
I know,
for
but just
All right.
And thank you so much for driving, Susan.
Oh my gosh, it's my
Great.
pleasure.
So, and you got it.
And this one retails for
This is 72.
72, but you'll make me a good deal.
I can do a good deal for you. Is that delicious? I love
This is amazing.
Cabernet Franc. This is the grape that lured me to Yakima Valley.
It's really good.
What's your favorite
Cabernet Franc?
with this?
For me, with Cabernet Franc, it's like braised short ribs. I'm looking for braised with Cabernet Franc.
She's really cute, isn't she? Really pretty.
You're pretty too. He said Susan was pretty, but I said you're pretty too.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. What's your name?
Nacho.
Natcha. Okay.
Not nacho.
N-A. Oh, N-A-T.
No, N-A-C-H-O.
Like I'm eating nachos. Is that a nickname?
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
a
nickname.
short name for Ignacio.
There you
Oh,
go.
exactly. Okay, that's on the cruise tonight. So remember that.
So it's not a French-inspired wine. You can see it. We always look back to what people have done before. We'd be foolish if we didn't. But then you take a look at that and say, well, how can I?
Cab Franc is light tannins.
I look back. Well, I look back. We're gonna hop inside and.
Almost smells like candy on the immediate nose, and
2004, I made a Cabernet Franc that I let hang on the vine. It's so delicious now.
very fruity and light fruit, full of flavor.
Cabernet Franc, the seed liquefies at much more sugar than Cabernet Sauvignon. Before you used to pick them all at the same time. Now Cabernet Franc is picked way
Yeah, I think we're
Ouch.
if you start to fall off the back.
Oops. Got your head?
Put our hands up high. This is an old alluvial deposit. So this hillside here is where we planted all the grown grapes because the soil is so rocky and with old riverbed. And so what we have planted here is Grenache, Syrah, and Morvet. Now, thankfully, and again, this is a very early ripening site, and so thankfully we still have a little bit of Morvet. that we'll probably pick tomorrow. So we can taste that. This is our effluent, beautiful effluent pond. I had this all set up here because I want to do a whole water reclamation project that we can reuse all of our water because we're abandoned.
You know that 95% of organic cannabis come from Washington.
I do.
Hey, you got that fact. I think that's coming out in the dollar.
Is it?
I just think you
What was the other one?
I don't know.
Right? Smells like money, doesn't it?
That's the Honey Crisp down there on the trellis.
Oh, they're
Are they the Honey Crisp apples?
No.
No.
I just wonder why you.
We're staying over at Wild Ridge.
Walrich, we're staying at
So how did you guys meet? No, because you're not from New Zealand.
No, we met in Sacramento through a friend.
Okay.
Nothing exciting.
Nothing exciting. Is that where you live now, Sacramento?
Yeah.
Where do you live in Sacramento?
we live in Roseville.
Roseville? Okay. You lived in Citrus Heights for, 4 years, and then
Okay.
Rancho Cordova, and then Sacramento.
Nice.
Yeah, we were there for about 13 years.
Right on.
So I keep finding myself falling to the hills, right? Okay.
Whereabouts in New Zealand?
I'm from Auckland, South Auckland.
Yeah. We shipped our son off to Marlborough for
Bad area.
one of his vintages, and then he did Clear Valley the next year.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah, so he did.
What was he doing in Marlborough? Was he just helping out?
Yeah, he's been making wine for
Okay.
I've been in America.
Sauvignon Blanc.
a lot of Sauvignon Blanc. Yeah, they did Riesling Pinot and Sauvignon Blanc primarily. You can see a little bit of fruit on the vines right over there, and then also on this meter by meter planting just above us. But this is a good cutaway.
Oh, yeah.
Of what we call the Ellensburg Formation, which is an old alluvial deposit. So this is an old riverbed. This predates even the volcanoes and the basalt above us here. So this is considered about 30 million years old. So it's really ancient soils. And it's very rare to have this soil type anywhere in Washington State. So this is something very unique to Yakima Valley. And then actually even more specifically to the Rattlesnake Hills in Yakima Valley. So because the reason why this doesn't exist throughout most of the valley is because this has been upthrusted above the flood line. And so, on my GPS, we are... it's still trying this all over the place there. But over there we're at 1,200 feet, and we're a little more than 1,200 feet here again. And what happens is all that, the glacial flood would take this material, if it was down below that, and just, wash it down, downstream. And so the few places where we had this grown, we have been very particular about what we grow on this. And so the Rhone grape varieties are very vigorous, they are prolific. And so in Châteauneuf-du-Pape, one of the famous grapes is Grenache. One of the most planted grapes is Grenache. And the Grenache was picked this morning. And it was extremely ripe. And what it does, it devigors this really vigorous grape variety. And the stones themselves retain a lot of heat, and Grenache loves heat. And I was explaining to you, at that kind of that optimal level in the morning, if you can be above 65 degrees Fahrenheit, you're going to have much more efficient photosynthesis for the day. So as a result, these rocks stay warm at night, and then you have these grape varieties that require a lot of heat that thrive in that soil type. So that's why we have Grenache, and then the very late ripening Mourvedre and Syrah grown here, and then eventually our plan is to make a single wine off this hillside. Just one wine.
They look pretty good.
They do, don't they? They're the same age as these guys. So, you know what the difference is here? Subsoil is the same. You know, it's all this, this alluvial soil.
Yeah.
But what this has is a little bit of that overlay of that volcanic ash and dust. And so there's just a little more in there. So try this Syrah that Susan and Nacho or have here. So this Syrah is grown on this soil type. And then when we get down to the winery, you get to taste our Exumbra Syrah that is grown on that, volcanic ash and dust. This is, we call this is an alluvial deposit. It's called the Ellensburg Formation.
ELL?
Ellensburg, yeah, as in the town of Ellensburg.
Okay.
Is that on the quiz?
Pardon me?
Yeah.
Ellensburg, is that one of the answers?
Oh, I'm not telling you.
The
really,
quiz.
You really want to say prize.
Yeah.
I think he denied something.
You
We
recorded, so you
we want that prize. It's a team effort.
right.
Price off the
Wait. Okay. Okay. This could be
show it to me?
this
I can
could be
holding it.
yours right here. So 3 questions.
Oh.
And I have said this on this tour. What's the average rainfall here?
5 inches.
5 inches.
Wait.
That's one.
Oh, that was good. That was fast.
Thank you.
He's a Kiwi. Of course he's smart.
You guys trust your banker?
Oh yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh yeah.
Oh,
You
yeah.
can put everything in the bag.
Second. What do you call this soil? This one right here.
The loose?
Loose.
LOESS.
L-O-O-E-S.
L-O-E-S-S.
Yeah.
Loose. Loose.
I can't pronounce anything, so
Last is
I'm trying to learn Spanish.
How do you spell it?
L-O-E-S-S.
Oh,
Third
like German?
question.
95%.
Asked myself these questions before coming. I forgot what my third one is. It'll come to me in just a minute. So, does everyone have this Syrah?
Yeah. It's tasty.
Now, the Syrah is really fascinating because we make another Syrah that hopefully we'll have a little later on from Red Willow Vineyard. Red Willow Vineyard is due west from here, and it's along this
Due west.
beautiful Autumn Ridge, and it's the same elevation as we are, but it's above the floods, but it's volcanic soil.
Okay,
So it
it's
tends to
very-
be just a little rugged, but it's also maybe 2 or 3 degrees cooler than we are here. So it's just a little more perfume. So this tends to be, to my sense of taste, it tends to be just a little more powerful, a little richer, a little more opulent.
Is that sourced in or is that your land?
And so we don't own it, but
Yeah.
we work with the family. that owns it.
Yeah. And then how many acres did you may have?
So we have 106 acres here total.
All
But the question that I was going to ask you is, what
This one?
was the high level of the flood when it hit here?
It's in here someplace.
Very
I
high.
remember.
Is that worth 100?
No.
Thank you.
100 feet?
1260.
Oh, 1260. There you go. That's close enough. That is so close. You have to give
Oh,
it
you guys got 2 out of 3. 1150.
Oh,
Oh my gosh.
What did you
That was
say?
your accent that he.
That was
What did you say?
No, I was just...
Yeah, he was. You were pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So our house is about like 1310, and but 1150. I mean, right here we're almost right at the edge, and so as a result, you see the silts over there. There's some silts, and again, just a little. This is west facing, so these wines are going to be a little more rugged.
so you said you've been doing this for 30 years. How long have you been on this property?
We've only been here getting grapes off this property since 06.
That's it?
Yeah,
Wow.
but I've been making one.
Yeah, but
Isn't
still,
it great?
yeah.
I love it. I mean,
Was this
we're
already
really-
planted to vine at that time when you
Some
came
were
in?
planted here, and then we went in and actually ripped out some that
Okay.
shouldn't have been planted here.
Yeah.
Had no right to be. We kicked
Yeah.
the vines.
Yeah.
How dare you?
Where did
be
you
here.
make out before? Here in the same
I was
same
making,
area?
Notch and I, we've made our wines over in Sunnyside in Yakima Valley.
Okay, cool.
And then we were
Okay.
able to to build this.
Oh, wow.
But it is great. I love living on the property and hiking here and, hiking the hills and really getting a sense of kind of what's what. And the view is beautiful. And it really does show you, why we only get 5 inches of rain.
Do you get any water out of the Yakima River?
Our water is groundwater. So it's from a deep well. We have another vineyard close by here that comes right out of the Yakima.
With the irrigation, is important how deep is the roots for
It
you
is.
guys?
The
deep it goes?
the older the vines, the less sensitive they are to the heat fluctuations because those vines are deep and
Deeper.
we don't know. I haven't really dug them out yet. How deep do you think they are? I mean, I have no idea.
I could be 3 feet. I mean,
3,
we
4.
tried to, the first couple of years, develop the root system versus growing, and then we only pick up until the third year. So I'm gonna guess 3-4 feet.
Yeah. Whereas you go to Napa and the dry farm vineyards, they can go down 30, 40 feet. But again, here, because Napa gets 35 inches
Dry
of rain
farms,
a year.
yeah.
We don't get it here. I mean, these vines don't live unless they're irrigated. So as a result, the roots tend to be a little softer, a little closer to the surface.
So they are more young roots.
Yeah, and as they grow, the years go by, they'll go deeper and deeper. And if we try to go, if we pump long hours of water,
So
it'll have
for
to
me,
go
kind of
deeper.
the big 3 messages that I
Try
really
to
wanted to leave you with
keep
is
them
the
back.
fact that
But
soil
you don't
matters.
keep that in mind.
And
Have the
what
irrigation.
grape you have grown in
You don't really
in what soils really matter, and it impacts flavor. If you're down, you like take a look at these the peaches down there. Are those peaches or those are peaches that are turning yellow? Those are that's a kind of a rocky block, and if you're in deep soils. Those are going to probably be bigger peaches and give you a different, just more yields. Whereas when you're dealing with wine grapes, you're not selling fruit. You want flavor, and so that's why this hillside is it's kind of like it makes you a little Willy Wonka winemaker. You can go around and work with the different soil types and come up with these different flavor profiles. But we do have Oompa Loompas that work in the winery for attention. They sing.
Oompa
That's
Loompas.
great. They're happy. Yeah.
But how many products do you sell? I mean, so you sell wine, you sell apples,
I don't. Nope. We just do wine.
Oh,
We're boring.
okay. So, but you grow apples.
Nope. Not here. I only grow cherries.
Oh, okay.
Oh, that could be my next.
What am I
That side
missing?
of people just here is part of the tour, right?
Huh?
Yes.
What's that?
The cider people you're talking about?
Oh,
My
Maybe
son
I'm-
makes cider.
okay.
We have to head back, I'm afraid. But any questions at all? We're going to be around all day long, and we'll be here for dinner, and we'll have a lot of
Cool.
Excellent.
Thank you so much for coming out.
Thank you. It was
David.
good.
A lot of people who come here, so
Interesting.
I love showing off what we do.
I bet.
And
Be pouring of your Grenache.
I will. In fact, you know what? Down there, that wine with the severed hand. My family crest is a bloodied, severed left hand.
What's your family
That's
crest?
great.
More
off. Yeah.
And so that is the Grenache base.
That's all other family crests. It's a shame.
Yeah, right?
David, you notice the difference in temperatures between the winery?
Did you notice that? Mm-hmm. Isn't that?
Oh, yeah, it's nice here.
Oh, it's hot.
Yeah.
It's like,
Basically, for every
Yeah.
degree of elevation,
It's so cold down there.
and and every degree of slope, you pick up a degree.
What
It's
What
like
is
that
your
whole
position
year?
here?
I have 2 vineyards and I
We
oversee
will
the
not have
winery.
snow here.
So both.
You're the man.
Yeah. Okay, so both vineyards and the winery, and you are the man.
Don't forget to say what this section is at the end.
Oh, like what this?
Yes.
Uh,
This is the tour of the wine.
Oh, this is the tour of the winery with David. Well, and the vineyard actually is what it is. The vineyard.
You guys are a great group. Thank you.
Oh.
Yeah, you guys are you're perfectionists. You know what? When I was in school, 66%. Yoo-hoo! I didn't know. Organic, and so I know which blocks are coming off.
Got it.
And so I knew we're getting the end of Honeycrisp, and I had one of our neighbors. I called them up and I said, "Hey, I need some." My daughters are in college, and like, we need apples. And so right now the Honeycrisp are super. They just left them on the tree, so they're super sweet. So they show up at the winery with 2 big buckets of Honeycrisp.
They're delicious. They're the best.
Yeah?
Oh, they are the best.
I picked a bunch this morning where we're staying. They haven't picked the Honeycrisp yet. And they grow them on ropes. It's so crazy because they grow sort of like a vine,
Really?
not like a normal apple tree.
Yeah?
And they've got pears and apples all around where we're staying. So I was out there this morning picking Honeycrisp, and they're the best.
Oh man, I need about 12. Can you pick me 12 by, let's see.
I can give you 2. I've got 2 in the vehicle.
I need 12 for 2 pies.
That's great.
We plan.
Up above here, there's a orchard. They have grannies. So the Granny Smiths are ready for
Well, we just planted 3 years ago. We planted a miniature Granny Smith in our backyard, and this year we have 4 apples, which we were thrilled. One of them went rotten. Exactly. So I think we'll wait until next year, but I'm hopeful. Because that's the only time I do it is at the holidays.
I planted an old variety of apple called a pound. Each apple weighs a pound. I just think, what the hell of it?
Really?
My kids love eating these gigantic apples.
So I suppose you can, like, they probably have, well, I guess it won't matter. We don't have our car this time, but I was going to say, like, farm stands and stuff alongside the road. And
I'd be surprised if they don't have apples over there. So let's go stealing this.
I haven't seen one farm stand in 3 days in the Yakima Valley.
Really?
No, I haven't.
Wow.
And all I wanted was an apple, so I'm glad we're staying where we are.
Thank you, Susan.
Next session is on hops. Hops. It is related to marijuana.
There we go. That's clean, right?
Cool.
Thanks for having me out, right? All right. Cheers. Hi guys.
Howdy.
What's your group's name?
Whole clusters.
Awesome. Well, my name is Nikolai Petra. I am a statistical geneticist and a hop breeder at Hopsteiner. So I make new varieties of hops, which is a little bit different than grapes, where the traditional varieties of grapes are very important to stay the same. In hops, everything new and interesting and whatever. Everybody always wants a new thing in the brewing industry. So it's a good time to be in the hop world. So that's my intro. Sorry, I just gave this whole talk, so I gotta rewind and remember what I was talking about. But so up here we have a few of the hop varieties that have come out of Hopsteiner. You guys, if you want to pass around, just take a quick look. But hops have 2 main purposes. One of them is for alpha, and one of them is for aroma. And what alpha is an extract from the hop plant that actually bitters the beer, but it also, its original purpose was it inhibits the division of bacterial cells, but allows yeast to divide in its presence. So when you make a wort, what essentially you're doing is you're making a big batch of sugar water, and then you'd add hops to it, and instead of bacteria taking over and getting some sewage that would make you sick, you get a little bit of alcohol, a little bit of carbonation, and a little bit of bitterness, and that's sort of where hops, hundreds and hundreds of years ago, monks, or I think it was monks, so says the folklore. What's that? Yeah, everything was monks, I know. Probably monks will come up again, I'm sure. But that's where hops started being added to beverages, was to keep them from going rotten. So like an India Pale Ale, you guys know IPAs? Yes.
They're the hoppy ones, right? So as the story goes, they had to get beer all the way to India. So what they did was they added more hops to keep it more stable, to ship it all the way to India. And now it's a very popular beer.
style. I'm gonna do a little bit of like this whole thing is supposed to be kind of gonna show you how hops grow. Gonna talk about that. Gonna show you a little bit about what happens with hops and brewers and the interaction, and then we'll get to sample some of final products with some hops that are actually in these beers, so you can give a little smell, and then you can taste a little beer. And we have a ton of beer, so if you want to like take one with you or sip on one during the talk, just throw up your hand and I'll toss you a beer. So this is a hop plant. I know you guys, as you came into the valley, I'm sure you saw those 18-foot tall structures everywhere down the valley. That's a hop trellis. The overhead for starting a hop field is gigantic because building that trellis is huge, and then you need to pick the hops, dry the hops, and bale the hops before you can sell them to a processor. So all this entails a lot of overhead. So hop growers, smaller hop growers, they hold on to their farms a lot because they have the overhead, they can do the thing. And then bigger hop growers definitely can build the infrastructure to do this. But it's not typically a game that someone just like wakes up one morning and is like, I'm growing hops, I'm gonna do it. You know what I mean? It's an investment. So this is a hop plant. This is actually a hop vine. So it's 18 feet tall. It grows out of a hill. And what a hill is a rhizome that grows underground. It's like a giant potato kind of. And it's a perennial plant, so I actually just go through and chop down the vines, and then next year they'll come back. You know what I mean? The rhizome stays in the ground. And so this is a hop vine. Each one of these things is a vine. They grow on paper string, which looks like this, or coconut fiber. In Germany, they actually grow on steel, which is interesting. The sun's coming in. So let's see. From each hill, they put 4 strings, so there'll be 4 vines that come out of each hill. So you have a hill, and then 4 strings come out of it, kind of either way to a wire. And so the shape of a hop field is hills, 4, all the way down the road. And then you actually don't walk or drive machine or anything down over the hill. You do it in between the 2 canopies. So different ways of harvesting this is. Everybody always has a bottom cutter. And what a bottom cutter is, it kind of looks like a giant men's beard trimmer, like with teeth that move back and forth, except the teeth are like this big, so it's like on the front of a tractor. It goes through and it chops the bottom of the hops off, and they kind of swing into the middle, and then people or machines, depending on how, but traditionally grab the bottom, and then something will come, a top cutter. So a top cutter is actually the name of a very famous beer from town, Bale Breaker. You guys,
it's good, really good.
But so then it pull it, as the plant moves this way, a truck is below it, and then a top cutter will hit it, and it just falls into the truck, and that just over and over again. And then it has the picking machines, and the picking machines essentially tear the hops apart, and I'll get to picking machines in a minute. Stay in the field here. So Hop Center actually has combines. We're the only company in the world that uses combines. There are 2 other farms that have bought combines from us, but what they do is actually in the field, they'll have a bottom cutter on the front of it, and then they swing in, and then there's 2, like, it almost looks like a toaster from the front, and the hops will come in, and there's all these little picking fingers, and they actually tear all these side arms off of the main vine, and then they leave the main vine in the field, and it goes and kind of composts itself over the winter back into the ground. And then they just bring in the side arms. So it's a little bit smaller carbon footprint to do it this way because you're not hauling as much plant material. The vine's actually quite a bit of the weight of the normal plant. You can see it's pretty thick, sturdy, woody material. You guys feel free to come over and grab on these hops. But so then what happens is they brought to the picking machine. And what a picking machine essentially is like a series of, like, imagine a conveyor belt, like a wide conveyor belt that's tilted like this, and so it goes like this, and you put all this junk on there, and what will happen is like leaves and sticks and stuff, they stay on the conveyor belt and get kind of passed along from conveyor belt to conveyor belt and then end up in the trash, and the hops just roll happily off and down onto a safe area for them to, the collection area. And on their way down there's a big fan that blows, and you can imagine like leaves will get blown over to the trash and the cone falls down, and essentially it's just a series of this happening over and over and over again until you end up with like a clean product. So picked hop will then go into what's called a kiln because you got to dry the hops. They're at like 80% moisture, 70-80% moisture when they're picked, and you dry them down to about 9-10% moisture. What a kiln is, it's actually a big room, 16 feet tall ceilings that gets hot air pumped into it, and then on the top of it you put 4 feet of hops, picked hops, and so it forces the air through the picked hops. And if you guys had been here a week ago, 2 weeks ago, the whole valley just smells like hops. It's actually pretty delightful. And so they try to, like, you have to drive off, not drive off, but you got to get rid of the moisture. Yeah, absolutely.
How it smells? How is the aroma? How is?
Intense.
Well, yeah.
No, what is how do you describe that?
Well, let's go in here and grab one.
Oh, I can smell.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm gonna go into this all in a minute, but one way to smell hops is you gotta crush them a little bit, and I'll explain why. But give them a little rub, give them a little smell. I think this one like smells like banana Laffy Taffy, but this one smells a lot. It's like spicy. These ones are fruity. This one smells like cat pee and weed.
Oh, this is nice. So you have the whole thing.
Yeah. So the
So if you
aroma
don't
part.
dry the hops out, like when you first pick them, how long will they last before they go bad?
So I cut this one down yesterday and brought it here. And technically they won't store as well, if they're not treated in this manner.
So if you want a fresh hop, you got to do it that day.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, I'll overnight people in California. I overnighted some guys in Sacramento, like just big boxes of hops that drilled holes in the boxes and overnighted them.
So they wouldn't last a week.
06277. No, definitely not. No, they'll rot. Yeah, there's a lot of moisture in there.
Who did you send it to in Sacramento?
Yeah.
Who did you send it to?
Oh, who did I send it to? I can't remember.
Moonraker, New Glory,
Me.
Plain Steak. Device.
I've dealt with like probably 600 brewers in the past 30 days, so I'm a little bit.
We'll find out when you get home.
Yeah, I gotta ask for you. I'll shoot you an email.
Yeah, okay.
Because you probably want to try it while you're there.
Definitely. Yeah.
And it's done with a hop formerly known as Denali 06277. So it's one of my favorites. Kind of has a pineapple thing going on. Okay, so we're in the kiln. They're pumping hot air into it, driving it off, drying up the cones. And what happens then is, kilns used to be made out of wood back in the day, and they burnt down all the time. And they used to burn diesel to dry them, and we've come a long way since then. Hot kilns don't burn down that often anymore, which is good. We use cleaner, like propane and things like that to dry them. But then what you do is you take dried hops and you throw them into a warehouse on a floor, and you let them sit there for like 6 hours. And this is called conditioning. And conditioning was actually fought against by different farmers and different people. They're like, I'm not building a whole warehouse with a cement floor just to throw hops on it for 6 hours once a year. You know what I mean? But what we found out is on the bottom of the kiln, they'd be drier, and on the top they'd be wetter. And then when you're in baling, so the next stage is actually baling, which it goes into a thing and is pressed into a 200-pound bale. It's like this big. And that's how hops are sold and brought to processors and et cetera, et cetera. But you'd get bales that are super dry and some that were super wet and some that, but in 6 hours the hops actually kind of, equilibrate. They change moistures and it actually makes the hops smell better. It stabilizes the secondary metabolites that you can smell, and that's a big thing for hops because how you sell hops and how you present hops to brewers is actually just like this. And the brewers show up. And so what this is called is a bale cut. Sorry, I'm kind of all over the place. Like I said, I gave this talk already. So it's but so what you do is you take a bale and you take this round hollow thing and stick it in there and pull out, a core sample. And then brewers show up. We had probably over 1,000 brewers show up over the past month. And they come to the table and they rub it up, warm it up a little bit, give it a smell, and they're like, yep, this is the one I want. And they'll smell a lot of hops, and I think it's actually kind of a futile thing for them to do, but they have their preferences and their traditions, and they're the ones buying it, so good on them. So,
Do you think it's futile because they like do it, or they get really picky, or like?
there's a lot of that going on, but also like if you're smelling 60 lots of Cascade in one day, and you have, let's say you're going to select 7 hops that day, so now you're like in the 300s of rubbing and smelling, like.
It's really precise too.
Yeah, I mean, and like these are strong. You know, like there's a, you know, like your hands they stick together after you do it. You know, it's your nose is tired. I think we did a test on an aroma panel, and like nose fatigue was like almost at like something like, you know, 50-50 accuracy, which means like you don't have any accuracy at all because you're just guessing after like 20 samples. So like nose fatigue builds up pretty quickly from these harsh resinous flavors and smells. Okay, what was I talking about? Anyway, so I'm going to do a little bit anatomy of a hop. So if you guys all want to grab a hop, I can teach you a little bit about them. A few here.
Thank you.
They're a little bit, I just picked this yesterday and harvest is over, so they're a little bit brown, but... Oop. So...
This brownish is from yesterday to today?
Yeah.
It's quick, huh?
It's probably, so these are actually experimental varieties from my yard, or from my experimental lots, because everything is picked already, so it's probably just over ripeness, they're sort of done, you know what I mean, and then they sort of turn brown in senesce, so like they're just old. I'll tell you all about it here in a second. So, let's all look at our hops. What you can notice when you look at a hop is that there is 2 different leaf-like structures on a hop cone. And they're called a bract and a bracteole. So what a bract is it's the pointy one that's typically darker green. And if you can pluck one of those out of there, you'll be able to see it. It looks sort of just like a little leaf. Has a little bit of that yellow stuff on it. The yellow stuff is called lupulin, and I'll talk about that more here in a minute. A little bit of yellow stuff. And the other one is called the bracteole, right? So if you pluck one of those out, you'll notice there's a lot more lupulin on it. And then if you flip it over, it has like a fold on the underside. The bracteole is actually the female reproductive organ. So this is where a seed would be, if in fact it was seeded. The reason it has more lupulin is because lupulin is where it's the thing in the hops that actually makes the aroma. It's the thing in the hops that has the waxes and the oils and the bittering acids and the antimicrobial effect. And so it's actually to protect the female reproductive organ from bacterial infection is like the thought process on this whole thing. And what lupulin is actually a modified hair. So it looks like a little lollipop. There's a little stem, and when it first grows up and then kind of forms a cup, and then like the subcuticular area fills with this like the waxes and the secondary metabolites, all the good stuff, where the money's at, right? So if you take your little bracteole and you smell it, it doesn't smell like too much, but if you pop all those little things in there, give it a little squeeze, give it another smell, you can tell you've released all that stuff in there. So yeah. And so when people rub hops or smell hops in the field, a lot of times I'll take a hop cone, tear it in half, and then like rub it together, and then give it a smell. It's just a way to break the lupulin.
It's the lupulin that is giving us the aroma.
Yep.
And that's what you care about.
That's where it's all at. That's where all the money is at.
It's the business end.
Yeah. And you can see it in these bale cuts. You can see the yellow area there. You know, the cross section of these hop cones.
Do they use for anything else, like aroma, perfume, or anything?
Yeah, I've heard it's been used. There's like some like supplements that it's used for. I did my undergrad on xanthohumol, which is in there. It's a secondary metabolite, and it's now being used in cancer research and diabetes research. 8-prenylnaringenin is a prenulated flavonoid that actually has estrogenic effects, so it can be used in, hormone replacement therapies and different things like that. So there is other uses for hops, but 99.9% of it is used in beer.
The good stuff.
Yeah, the good stuff, exactly. So, so varieties. There's a lot of varieties. A lot of them are either aimed towards alpha production. So I'm going to talk a little bit about alpha. So now we've gone through lupulin. You can imagine like Budweiser doesn't want a bunch of this, plant material showing up on their front door. You know what I mean? They need to keep everything clean, everything tight. They need to have the exact right amount of everything in their tank that's as big as this building to make sure that they have consistency, in every batch, etc. So we actually do a thing where we at Hop Extract in town, we make hop extract. Weird, right? So what it is supercritical CO2 actually is like a solvent, and so that means CO2 under pressure acts like a solvent. So you can imagine, like, if you got some alcohol on your hands right now, this resin would kind of come off a little bit, you know what I mean? So what we do is you put hops in a tube, you pour supercritical CO2 over it, and it like washes out all the yellow stuff, pretty much, gets all this resin out of the hops. And then you take the hops off, and then you take the pressure off, turns back into gas, and you're left with like this waxy layer of hop extract. And so you can sell that. Most big breweries, all big breweries, use hop extract because you can add the exact amount you need, with a syringe into your big brewery. You can do it over and over again. You can do the same everywhere in the world. And you don't have to deal with all this leaf tissue and all this other stuff. A lot of the little guys, they throw this stuff right into their beer. It's called dry hopping at the end of the process. And it actually absorbs some beer, as it, it also gives flavor and aroma. But as it absorbs, you can't get that beer back. You can't squeeze all the hops. I mean, people do. They like take out the tea bag, essentially, like try to squeeze out as much beer as they can because you don't want to have that much product loss. But so let's see. I did.
It's funny you say that because Vicky was just saying the other day, she hates where we, big craft big breweries coming in buying little breweries and all that. Yeah. But we were talking like, how does Budweiser keep their recipe so consistent? How is it? Because we, that's a hard thing for a brewery to do, is to replicate that exact same recipe. And we've got a brewery in Sacramento, they had a great can of beer and they released it 6 months later. It's like, what? It's totally different.
Right.
And so Becky was saying, she's like, how does Budweiser and Coors make every bottle exactly the splits?
Yep.
It's the extract.
Well, and then like with these styles over here.
The amount of intervention, or the
The
control.
Solero method.
Yeah. And then like these styles over here, actually, like the brewing process, like there'll be like proteins that come from the grain that actually stabilize hop oils and make them more polar, and then you can taste them. But then over time, like that relationship decreases, and then it tastes different. It's like there's like yeast hop interactions where like yeast can like clip some molecules, and then they'll actually come back together over time, and then you can't taste them. Like, so they'll like eat parts of the sugar off, and then like it'll disassociate the molecule, but then eventually over time they'll reassociate, and then your taste buds can't interact with them anymore. So there's a lot of that. We can talk about that forever. So yeah, we have on the table here, I'll get new beers, but I'm just setting them out. So over here we have a Helles, which is a German style beer in South Germany, Hallertauer region. Same parallel as Yakima. And they typically use a noble hop. This is Willamette. Over there they would use, Hallertau or Tettnang or Perle, all German varieties. They don't grow very well here. Germany, even though it's on the same parallel, much different. Like, in this rain shadow, so everything you see that's green is actually irrigated. Everything. The dirt on the ground here is actually pushed over by the Missoula flood and a glacier, and then like it melted and left all this great topsoil here, and carved through to the Columbia River. But like, so I don't know. I say if you spit on the ground in Yakima, like a tree will grow. You know what I mean? Because the soil is so good. But yeah, there's no water anywhere. But over in Germany, it actually rains a lot, so they have different varieties, different diseases, similar diseases, but different disease problems or pressures, than we have in the Yakima Valley. So I put these hops out from lighter to bigger, I guess is one way to put it. And then, let's see, this is Lemon Drop. This is one of our proprietaries, came out of our program. Cascade is the #1 grown hop in America. It's brewed with, in almost all craft brews, it's the backbone. It's the most acreage. It's it's the backbone of and it's what the whole craft industry was kind of built on.
Why that name?
Cascade?
It's original from here?
Yep. The Cascade Mountains. Yep. Let's see.
Oh, this is an experimental that's actually related to Cascade. That's kind of cool. This one I really like. Smells like pineapple. And then this one, like I said, has a really big flavor. And so, I don't know if you guys want to come up and actually do a smelling. Like, you know, you can definitely get away with kind of just popping it and sniffing. But if you really want to get in there, I have some hand sanitizer in my car that will get the sticky off your hands. But yeah, I don't know. Any questions? I can start opening and pouring some
When
beers.
you say German, compared to German, do you include Belgium in Dutch?
No. I mean, so they don't grow a lot of hops there, and actually a lot of their beers don't have a lot of hops in them. There, they'll be darker styles, you know, very wheat driven, or you know, the yeast driven profiles in those beers, especially. But
So you know how Nelson hops, New Zealand, like the Sauvignon and Nelson are really, everyone wants them, they're hard to get. Do you think you could grow Nelson hops in Yakima?
I don't know. It's a good question.
Because it's the rainfall, the temperature, and all
right.
that.
I mean, we could, you know, with a bunch of time, and you know, if we
Yeah.
really tried to tweak it. But I think it's a proprietary brand down there, and they won't let it be grown anywhere else except in New Zealand. So
that's what they said about the kiwi fruit.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're all grown in California.
Yeah. But yeah, one of these days we'll probably get it up here. There's yeah.
How do you get the hop pellets?
So that's just the dried hop from this. Yeah, absolutely. Pushed through a pellet mill. So they just essentially run it over with like a giant tire that has a bunch of holes in it, and then you know.
This compresses it.
It's like this shrunk down and.
Yep.
And the experimental varieties, how are you developing those? Like, what's that? Are you crossing?
Yeah, definitely. So I'll go into experimentals. You guys want to have a beer? And
Yeah, please.
Let's do it.
Because the Simcoe hop is trademarked, isn't it?
Yeah, big time.
It's very
So that's what you would do with your experimental ones. If they start taking off, you would give them you'd give them a name, and then you would trademark them, and
Absolutely.
then you've got to come through your.
So like
company.
Lemon Drop is. So this is Lemon Drop. It came out of the experimental program. Got a name. It's Lemon Drop. This is a beer with it in it. Give it a go.
Yeah, I've never heard of it.
Steiner's traditionally been an alpha forward breeding program.
What's the difference from the first one?
Also, I have cups, right? You guys don't have cups?
This is very nice.
Once you guys perfect the experimental, like 06297, you'll give it a name and then it'll be like Joe.
Yeah. Great.
Amazing.
Which one is this one? That's when you just give her. No, I mean the name of it. Centennial.
This one goes
don't
with
know where it
Cascade. That's fine.
Which one is this one? This is very intense.
Centennial, it's a really classic American hop. It's actually Cascade Centennial is like a very common mix. It's I don't know. It's very popular. It's actually kind of hard to grow, but it's a very popular hop.
What are the beers with no hops made of?
I don't know that there is beers with no hops.
Oh, I thought you said the German ones, some of them don't
Yeah,
have.
they just use a little bit of hops. There's a lot less hops, but in Germany you technically can't call it a beer unless it has hops in it.
Oh, okay.
It's like part of the law.
I think there's something that has like, they uses like something herbal. There's like a particular style of beer in Germany.
Okay.
I only know this because my organization developed like a beer staff training, and it said all beer needs hops, and my boss said that's not right.
Really?
There's
Okay.
some specific
I should look into
one
it.
specific and it uses something else like something herbal or flowers. Or
Yeah, it makes sense. I wonder if it has like that same antimicrobial thing going on, or if they can get away with like it's just a bitter and they just like add a flavor.
Okay, here you go.
I wonder, let me see if I can find that. I think I do.
Some of them, to be totally honest, I just went into the warehouse and grabbed beers that I knew had my hops in them.
You don't go to that process of yeast fermentation that the Belgium do, the Dutch people do?
Yeah. I mean, so I don't actually make beer. I make new varieties of hops, and then we just sell hops to people who brew with them.
I'm trying to understand the difference between what I saw over there and what I have over here.
As far as the brewing styles go?
Yeah.
It's just different malts that they're using, different varieties of hops, different
North Carolina.
yeasts,
North Carolina.
lots of different
Different
yeasts.
everything.
Yeah. So they're very traditional with like their
Forget about it. It's different
and then-
everything.
Yeah, and then like they actually will add some bacteria in some of theirs, like Brettanomyces. They'll give a hop a totally different flavor because of the way it digests sugar, or not a hop, a beer a totally different flavor because of the way it digests sugar. They're just, it's like hops is just like a paint, you know what I mean? And the brewers like
got
the
it.
artists,
Okay.
Raw product.
Oh, I see.
Okay. Gruit ale.
Gruit?
Gruit, G-R-U-I-T,
That actually
uses
sounds-
herbs.
Really? Sounds familiar.
What I learned. I know I made sure it was
But
true.
is it actually beer?
Ale? It's called ale, so
Right.
I don't know. I mean, they can also name it.
I have no idea, I know that there's like a law in Germany that you have to have hops, otherwise you can't call it beer.
Okay,
And it's
maybe
like
that's-
this old standing law.
Yeah. I like
Right.
this.
Could be.
That one go with this one?
But
Yeah.
you can
A
label
little bit of
them
that one and a
differently,
little bit
so
of
anyway.
one of these. This one. Mainly this one.
Yeah. Very nice. This is very nice. This Hellfels.
Yeah.
Nice and light.
Yep.
And,
Traditional German, South German style.
oh, is it?
Yep. That's actually made in Oregon, but it's one of the best Helles's.
Eugene.
Like
Yeah.
Bavaria?
Yep, Bavarian. Yep.
Move my thing.
In Cassie?
It's almost
like
it's almost like a sparkling wine.
Yeah, it's a little bit.
So this is lemon drop?
Yep, that's lemon drop,
Okay.
lemon drop.
And this is Willamette.
So, yeah, that one almost definitely has lemon in it. Traditionally, sorry about that.
It is, yeah. Ooh, that's good. I like that a lot.
What would happen if you get like more rain while they're all grown? Like, would it ruin the crop?
Not too much. We'd see different diseases. Like if all of a sudden started raining here, we'd get downy mildew, which is typically
It
doesn't thrive here because it's so dry.
it doesn't like that.
But you'd probably get some downy mildew.
Not as bad as like grapes.
No, it's not like pop or split cherries or
Well, it's open.
a little bit more stable, a little bit more robust. But everything affects yields.
See you in about.
We're getting a lot of smoke in the valley in the
Did
late seasons now, and people are like, "Oh, how does that affect the hops?" I'm like, "Well, it's only been like 2 years in a row. I don't know."
No, it's spitting.
The other one is
Yeah, absolutely. This Hellas. Wait, this one's
Well,
probably the
there's a
better one.
cold
I should
one right there.
let me open up a new one.
There's that one right there.
Oh, there you go.
One-handed.
I'm gonna get rid of
It'd
these.
probably be okay. You probably wouldn't get in trouble.
I haven't tried the
That's strong.
that bottle one. Yeah, that was good. Was this just open? This one?
No, just that one right there.
Oh, I would try that one.
Oh.
I have not tried the terminal
I like that
gravity.
one.
Let me get you a cold
That
one.
one I like.
Okay.
In fact, I
Here's-
probably like that the best so far.
After
The yellow can.
comes from original day.
I
The
like
sweetness would come from the
that.
grain.
That one I like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you malt
It's
the grain,
not-
you kind of like wake it up
It's not
and then
so
you kill
light
it,
like this
and
one.
then you add water and it leaches sugar
That
into
one,
the.
yeah, I like that one.
Yeah. And then yeast eats sugar.
Anybody else?
Makes
I will.
alcohol and CO2.
That's good. That's good. Thank
So
you.
yeah, the sweetness is from the grain.
Thank you.
Oh, that's got
Some
quite
of
an
them
my
aroma.
God. I have to drive all the time.
Yeah, they probably
Oh,
could
no, I
get
have a
perceived
drive, I'm
sweetness
fine.
from it for sure, but not an actual like.
We'll watch
not a
for
brick.
Patrick, our
That's
driver.
our aroma.
Right, make sure he's not
Yeah. Oh, who do you have, Patrick?
Isn't the driver? No, isn't the...
Which one is this? Is that the one that's...
It's 277. Yeah.
No?
Our driver is
And
Eric.
Eureka.
Guy just told us beer.
The guy drinking
This
the
beer
beer.
actually went to Brow last year and this year.
Lo siento.
I don't know, to represent American style IPAs.
I mean,
in
it is-
Germany.
This is
It's kind of funny when I'm in Germany, people are always like, "Oh, try my IPA, try my IPA," and I'm like, "I just want to drink your beer."
Yeah, for sure.
The IPAs are better in America.
Yeah.
I just want to drink
No, this
Augustino
is
over
too bitter for
here.
me.
Me too. No, it's not fun.
Ew, honey, you can have this. Too bitter.
But yeah, it's taken off over there
Yeah,
a little
too
bit.
bitter.
Can I try? You just
Yeah, this one here is
That's
just open.
good.
No, I don't want to. I'm going to try that.
But next, you have to do the can, and then I think you're done, right?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
Oh
My
yeah,
favorite's the
Grass
yellow.
loves it.
size.
Yeah, it's really
Yeah.
What's this one?
Sierra Nevada Pale Ale. That was like one of the first craft beers in America.
Yeah, I still remember this one. I haven't had it for a while.
And it's kind of inspired all the other craft scene, really.
He's gonna.
Look what they started.
I like it.
I was going to say, it employs you.
The latest.
No, take your time.
The latest and the greatest.
Sure does.
He's a classmate of mine.
Oh yeah.
Thank you.
Connecticut. I just read that actually on the back.
I've met you before, I think.
7.2.
Frankenstein? What is it called?
Brantford, Connecticut.
It's
called Frankenstein.
Yeah.
A couple years
It
ago.
looks like
I don't like the smell of it.
Experimental.
Nice.
IPA
I
series.
was actually working for Virgin Dynamics.
It is cool.
Oh, cool.
But it's all interesting.
Yeah, it is. It is. They're all a little bit different. Too.
For the side
It's all
notes.
right, but
I think so.
So which one is your aromatic?
Eureka?
So you
Is that-
probably have a few.
A few of them, yeah.
Is this the right pairing?
Eureka and 06277.
so we like the
Oh, both of those.
Yeah, both of them. But mainly.
Hell's Bell's the best.
Wait a minute. Sorry. That's in this one.
That one. Oh, so should this be, and then,
Yeah.
By a case.
And then this one has this one in it.
there you go.
Okay, there we
Let's
go.
get into photos.
Yeah, I remember this one.
Yeah. It's a good one.
How do professionals taste beer? Like we taste wines?
Pretty much.
When did you get into craft
Yep,
beer?
pretty
Like,
much.
oh,
Swirl it, smell it.
Yeah.
The head is something that you guys don't have.
The head of the curve.
You know, the actual bubbles that sit on top. That speaks to like the protein content in the beer.
Does the glass make a difference, or like we have the legs and the tears?
Yeah, you have. I don't think they really do much with legs in beer, but they do. You know, so
With
maybe
the foam?
Foam, yeah. It's
And the
called
legs,
head.
legs
Oh,
really
head,
don't mean much
okay.
in wine either, except for viscosity.
Right, that's what they say.
Yeah.
But they look good. The legs.
Can I have one can of this?
So yeah, my job is to hops
right?
to procreate, and then plant out all the seedlings, and then walk through the seedlings and find ones that are good, and then move them on up. So it takes about 10 years to breed a variety of hops.
Wow.
So your conception or your cross, you pick this mom and this dad, and then what you do is you we'll get the seedlings the next year. So you have the cross, and you get the seeds, and then you actually have to throw them in the freezer over the winter to simulate the winter, and then you put them in the ground. And it takes 2 years for a hop to get to maturity. So like we're on year 3. I'm looking at all these hops, 40,000 hops. Well, yeah, there are a lot of hops. And I'll walk
40,000 different varietals?
different varieties. I probably have 70,000 different varieties under my care right now. So databasing is something I'm.
Do you have a team with whom you're doing that? Or
Yeah, team. We have a very small team.
Small team? Okay.
Yeah, we have a very small team. And I haven't slept in like a month and a half.
Okay,
Right
that's
now. It's the only time I get to actually go look
Right,
at them.
yeah.
So, you know what I mean? And we were like, we take them apart, like put, make different samples for like chemistry and for aroma and for, like density studies or like, different secondary metabolite studies, different chemistries, actual cone shape studies and stuff. But so anyway, year 3, you get to look at a hop and decide whether you like it or not. But there's only one of them in the whole world, right? So like if you like it, you get the next thing you have to do is put it in what's called a multi-hill nursery. So single hill nursery is what's first, which is the brewery Single Hill. It's actually named after Single Hill. Yeah. So multi-hill nursery is what it goes to next. We plant them in a 4x4 block, and they grow up. You get to see like canopy structure. You get to see if they play well with others, because like if in the single hill, the next 2 ones next to it are both like little Charlie Brown trees, and like it's getting its nutrients and a little more sun, but then you put it in a block and it doesn't do so well. You know that it was just an advantage it had in the single hill. So that's 2 years more, right? So now we're in year 5, and there's like 10 pounds of this hop. You know what I mean? Like they have 40 pounds of hop. Not enough for really anybody.
That's okay,
right? So we still like it, still disease resistant, still yielding well enough, still has like the chemical characteristics that we're interested in, alpha, beta, aromas, oils, whatever. We'll bring it into a 40 hill plot, which 40 hill plot's big enough to make a 200-pound bale out of, 200 and a half, depending on how well it yields. And at that point, we can actually start getting into brewers and stuff. But that's another 2 years. So now it's 8 years into the process, and we finally are like, hey, brewer, what do you think of this guy? You know what I mean? And so if they kind of like it, then we'll go to a 5-acre plot. The 5-acre plot's almost like where my kids go off to college. But this is like year 9. You know what I mean? Like, because I'm like, well, good luck with the market and the sales guys and the brewers and the whatever. So what we're trying to do is come up with ways to accelerate this process. Because, you know, it'd be like, I'll be 40 by the time I get a variety out there. So you can't live long enough to do this. Yeah. It's like every
40. Oh my God.
Yeah, I know. I've been doing this for a long time. So what was brought on to do is do statistical genetics, and we sequenced the genome a few years ago, and we're not doing GMO. GMO is not for hops. Hops don't feed the world, and to get like government regulation on something, it has to be like something that's important to like humankind. I mean, beer is important to humankind. I was going to say, most important.
It's a true necessity.
Right. So, I mean, or you just have to have enough money to pay off somebody to get your regulation through. Hops isn't a big enough crop to have that kind of money. So, what we're actually doing is just using the genome as another observation. And so, like, a really good example of this is like male hops look just like female hops, except they don't have cones. So every hop you see is a female, every single one. But the male hops have this little reduced cone, flower, and they grow in like little clusters, kind of like grapes. Can be about this big. And in the spring, they like, pop open in the morning and like cough pollen into the air and try to, the pollen just floats around and tries to find a female. And so if you ever walk up to one and like hit it, it'll just like down. You ever seen like a pine tree?
Yeah, sure.
It kind of is like that. It just like, pukes pollen. But yeah, so like for the longest time, someone would be like, "Wow, this hop is really big and nice, and I love it. Let's breed it. Let's see if we can get let's next generation. Keep it going." And so like you would go to the male yard and you'd be like, "That one." You know what I mean? Like there's no way to tell because you can't find any of these important characteristics from the male. So what we did was we measured all of these traits, cone densities and all the chemical traits and whatever, and then we used mixed linear modeling and found out what parts of the genome correlate to these traits, right? And so now I can actually ask male hops, are your daughters going to have dense cones? Are your daughters going to be high producers? You know what I mean? And so I can make better selections and enrich, instead of just guessing and then end up with some stuff, right? And so we're also bringing in wilds, so we have this this Georgian hop, not Georgia the state, but Georgia the country, that actually is resistant to all the powdery mildews in the valley. And so we want to integrate this, and we want to integrate it quickly. And so what will happen is, let's say you do a cross with, the dad is resistant and the mom is resistant. The something valley. Oh no, I can't remember. Sorry. We have hop hunter over there. We have wild hop hunters all over the world right now, actually, trying to find stuff. We want to keep the germplasm wide, too. We don't want to get too monoculture germplasm. I can look that up for you, though. I'm going to find out if I could call them. So you have a male that's resistant, a female that's resistant. You cross them, all the kids are resistant, right? Some because of mom, some because of dad, and some because of both. The traditional breeder is well, they're all resistant, so that's good. You know what I mean? Right. But I can see both. You know what I mean? And then knock the other ones off the table and keep those ones so you can get this stacked, bring all these resistance together, naturally occurring resistances. And then another thing we can do is let's say I only get 20 acres of land to do my experiments on, right? And so I make a cross, a bunch of seedlings in a big hoop house. I go through and I can look and I can actually tell which ones are going to be males, which ones are going to be high producing, which ones are going to be resistant to disease. And instead of having half of that 20 acres be males and just totally useless to my program, I have 20 acres of resistant females with potential, high yielding, disease resistance, blah, 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 blah. And so if you think of the numbers game, that's actually having, 300,000 acres, you know what I mean? And those ones would have made it there, you know what I mean? So they really utilize land a lot better, enrich the numbers. I mean, because it's still a numbers game. Even with all this technology, you still need our agronomists to walk through and look and be oh, that one's a good one. Let's do it, or and then So this is like the low-hanging fruit, right? Sick, not sick, 1, 0. You know what I mean? I can tell my algorithm, this one's sick, this one's not sick, you know, a few hundred times, and then it'll be like, these are the things that correlate with your observation. But I can't tell it like orange, vanilla, creamsicle pops, you know what I mean? Like, because that doesn't work. So like the high-hanging fruit is actually like a, you know, secondary, like GCMS for, you know,
me too.
chemical profiles, and then relating that to like what humans think those smell like, and then trying to get those numbers into the algorithm to make a breeding tool out of it. And that's a lot harder. We have some.
So what you're saying is
tricky
you're
ways.
not paid near enough for what you know.
Yeah, not near enough. Gotta keep this guy around. So yeah, long story short.
How much education do you have? This is some pretty serious level
Yeah,
stuff.
well, so Hofsteiner actually, in undergrad, they funded some undergrad research that I was doing on xanthohumol, the secondary tablet that fights, it's used in cancer research right now.
Okay.
I was trying to find the genes responsible for it. Yeah. Okay, I believe.
Oh yeah, that.
Yeah. And then, so they funded that research, and then they funded my grad school research, and then they hired me out of grad school. So I've been doing
level, so you got a PhD?
No,
or?
just a master's.
Master's.
Yep.
Okay.
So I tell people I went
ever
pro.
say just a master's.
Well, right. I tell people I went pro. I was like, you know, I always wanted to get a PhD, but then, you know, somebody's like, hey, do you want to get paid to do the same thing you're doing? And I was like, yeah. I'm into that. How do you feel about money? I've never had it.
Right up there with oxygen.
Speaking of money, can you give us $300 and call it even?
We'll just do it. Yeah, I guess I should come up with some.
Good job, honey.
Come up with some questions, right?
I know, it's fine.
Yeah.
Give me some real sciencey stuff. Come on.
What's higher than 50%?
60%.
Okay, we have a winner.
Do you know where this is? This sold in California?
Yes, I think so.
Uh huh. I
would
really
say
like that a lot.
Almost definitely.
Is that a Sierra product also?
Nope.
Yeah.
It's Ninkasi.
Oh,
Yeah, they're pretty big, aren't they?
Oh yeah, I see that one all over
And
the place.
they're
California?
Well, no, I'm here.
Oh, well.
No, they're sold quite a bit in
You
California,
wouldn't get that
especially like
funny
the.
here.
I've never
California.
looked. Yeah.
It's all
I mean,
over the place here.
I see all those beers when you walk in, and
Gotta do the questions quick.
Okay.
What is the growing region in Germany that we're on the same parallel as?
oh, I heard it, but I don't remember.
Bavaria?
What is it?
Growing region in Germany that we're on.
Well, what is the parallel then?
It's the 46th. It's the 46th parallel.
Said the region twice though.
Yes, you did.
I'm supposed to. The
Hella
last group
bro.
missed it, so they made me use
Baden.
the word.
What's it start with?
No.
What's the letter?
Right now,
And the
They
middle
gave us
letter and the end
hints
letter.
Not Baden.
A clue?
No.
Baden,
Clue?
Baden.
Starts with an H.
yeah, Hamburg. No.
Hamburg.
Hollenbosch.
Hamburg's up north.
Is it?
Yeah.
No.
It's
I
very
remember you
not.
talking about it, and I made a mental note.
Not a very good
Way back.
All right, second question.
Okay, we'll return
The Hallertau region.
What was the question?
The Hallertau region.
Oh, that's the answer. Yeah, I was not
Okay.
going to get that.
All right.
Okay, sorry.
Second question.
I'm not that one.
You want
200
to
pounds.
Oh, yeah, please.
Which one do you want?
The house from Germany.
What is it? The bract or the bracteal that is actually the female reproductive organ?
Say it one more time.
The leaf.
The bract
or the
bracteal?
I would have said bracteal.
Is that the final answer?
Bracteal.
Yeah, 50-50.
Bracteal.
Oh, good job.
Excellent.
And that
All
team is
right.
nice.
Job team.
How tall do they grow?
Yeah.
Nobody knows that.
18-foot pole.
Got it.
Good
And the answer.
Sometimes it's a person. I'm thinking, how is somebody going to get up 18 feet to cut that
Is it
little
Nick or Nikolai?
rope?
Nikolai.
And the kilns.
Yep.
The kilns are also
We got one
easy.
more
I love
question
that.
just
Thank
for the hell of
Oh my
it.
God.
We got one more question just for the hell of it.
Yeah, maybe. Throw it out there.
Um,
No, she was very strict with
And a
the
little
money.
pencil. Full.
The lady who
Barbara?
put this on, she was like, don't
Yeah, we're
just
going-
give out the
we're
money.
going
you know
Make
that.
the questions hard and don't just give it out. She was like,
I like it.
I think it's pretty good.
Right.
2 out of 3 each time.
You should do what the doctor says when they go in there now, and they say, I'm going to give you 3 questions, and then I'm going to give the same 3 questions at the end of the
So-
physical. And you have to
Leftovers
so
come to the
take us
table later, right?
back
I'm
and
not
give
gonna
us the
do
first
anything.
3 questions, and then
Drag them over there.
I know.
I'm going to the van if anyone is in that. And you said you don't brew anything. You just make this and sell it to brewers.
Yep.
Good, thanks.
Oh, I need mine.
Which are preferable?
If you guys want some of these beers, I'm just going to dump some bittersweet.
Next is the cider, apple cider choc.
Die hard cider.
Yeah.
But as soon as you bite into it, you want.
Yeah.
Honey Crisp is good.
Yeah.
The best.
Is Honey Crisp a new apple? Relatively
It's a newer apple. It's been around for about 20 years.
Okay,
25 years. It came from the University of Minnesota.
Ah.
And they funded their whole biology program on that apple variety that they produced.
Wow.
So over the course of the last 20 years, there's been
some change,
improvements to it.
Yeah.
Earlier, more red,
Lasts longer.
Not really better flavor. It's just a lot of it has to do with getting first to market and having more color to them.
Yeah.
You know, to market them better.
I noticed some of the apples, like I know I buy some at Costco, they seem to last a long time. Is that some
of the newer varieties do last a little bit better. There's one out there called Autumn Glory, and we call these salad bowl apples, or you can just put them in a salad bowl and let them sit there for a while.
Yeah.
And they don't brown. There's one called Opal, and there's another one called Autumn Glory, and they may wrinkle a little bit, but they're still crisp when you're biting into them.
Why is that?
Genetic
modification?
It's not a genetic. It's part of a breeding program. I don't really know. I don't really know on it. Yeah.
A happy question.
Sure.
Is this ice wine?
It is an ice wine. We call it ice cider. Yeah. we produce something like we produce that too. Is this everybody in your group?
No.
Got a couple more stragglers. Okay.
Sorry, didn't mean to back into you.
You're fine.
well, coat break too? They went to get their jackets.
Oh, okay. That's fine.
Those are so little. They look like crab apples or whatever, you know.
Those
the
are
horses
actually
eat.
those came out of a breeding program in California in the 40s and 50s.
Huh.
They are a crab. They're called Wixon crab.
Oh.
And crab is a term used for a wild apple. So there's different terms. There's pippin. Pippin means a wild apple. Crab means wild apple. There's just been from every parts of the world they call wild apples different things. Here we would call them crabs, not pippins. Pips are like the seeds and the core of the apple. So like Newtown pippin or Cox's orange pippin and those ones, they came from a pip. They were a seedling. Okay, all apple varieties are.
Did
from a
Did
seedling.
anyone leave a coat over there?
How many groups are there?
Three.
Three. Oh, so this is the last group. Okay.
We're the grand finale.
Why do you call it hard cider?
Why do we call it hard cider? In the U.S., people think cider as juice. Just
really?
Juice.
Yeah, you know.
So no alcohol?
No alcohol.
You
And
know,
so
Thanksgiving, they have the Martinelli's cider, and it's like champagne.
Really?
Or you go to a dry wedding, they'll use
And
that
there is no alcohol in it?
No. So what happened? You know, we can kind of get in the history of apples. So what, you know, in the United States was kind of built on apples basically. So when colonists and migrants came over from Spain first, they brought apples with them. And in England, they brought apples with them, and it came from Europe, right? So apples were something that kind of built America, and before our Constitution was written, cider was the drink of America, and up until the temperance movement, which was about the 1880s, 1890s, cider was the highest volume alcohol product drank by more people in the United States than wine, than whiskey, than anything else. Cider was the number one alcohol product in the U.S. And the reason being is because when the Louisiana Purchase opened up, and let's say people were going out to claim their 320 acres or half section, they had to guarantee the government that they would put in a certain amount of acreage of sustainable agriculture. And sustainable then didn't mean trying to maintain topsoil and be efficient and that sort of thing. It meant sustainable meant your family could live there and survive. So they had to put in a couple acres of garden, they had to put in some cows, and almost always they put in apple trees. And apple trees provided them with something they could eat right away, but it also provided them with a beverage that they could make that lasted all year, typically safer than the water that they could drink because it went through a kill point, it went through fermentation. And actually they made two products. They made cider, and then they would reconstitute the apples that they would press and press them again, and they would make and then ferment that and make a product called apple kin, and that's what they would the children would drink. And so it was just a lower alcohol cider, I'm sure most of you have heard of Johnny Appleseed. That was kind of a history, but he really made his money. He wasn't a guy that was a hobo throwing out apple seeds. He was a businessman.
To be honest.
He was a businessman. His name was John Chapman, and he went up and down the Ohio River and set up nurseries and sold these nurseries to colonists that were coming across America to set up their plot of land. And he shipped scion wood and rootstocks up the Ohio River, and because he knew these migrants moving across the U.S. were going to plant apple trees anyways. He would just get them set up ahead of time and then sell it to them. Basically, he had maps of the sections that people could claim, and he would go out put up the nursery before they could get there.
What year was this?
This is just after the Louisiana Purchase opened up, so 1820s, 1830s, something in there. Yeah. So we go from there to where everybody drank cider. Everybody had an apple tree in their backyard. Everybody knew that everybody else drank cider. Whiskey was kind of a big thing. Bourbon, obviously. When the commodity got cheap, more whiskey was made in the U.S., but cider was always part of American tradition up until the temperance movement. Now, there's a person called Carrie Nation that was really behind this temperance movement. This is before the Prohibition era in the U.S., and this is like 1880s, when kind of during the Industrial Revolution. So Carrie Nation, a Bible in one hand and a hatchet in the other to break cider barrels and bourbon barrels, basically vilified the apple. And she said, and this was in good intention, because men were getting drunk and going to work and falling into machines and spending all their money and maybe never coming home. She was trying to temper, this movement was trying to temper the U.S. by getting rid of alcohol. So during the temperance movement, Carrie Nation, with her Bible in hand, vilified the apple, saying, this is the fruit that Eve tempted Adam with, right? And if you're making cider with this, if you're making alcohol with this, and you're on the bullet train to hell. Yeah. So people went in their backyards and cut down their apple trees that they made cider out of. So the whole industry just basically collapsed, because people started whispering, John over there, he hasn't cut down his apple trees yet. He's got a ticket to hell in his pocket. So, and that's how these things, the whole industry collapsed in the U.S.
How did they? Sorry to interrupt. So back in the day, how did they? Was it just wild yeast that they'd press the apples and leave it open for wild yeast, and that's what produced the alcohol?
Exactly. And
that's
so
all it was.
At the time, you were asking, why do Americans call cider hard cider? And it was because at the time, before the temperance movement, there was all these cideries that were making cider, and they had, now Prohibition came into effect, and so they couldn't make alcohol anymore. But they kept pressing juice for local farmers, and they made apple juice, but they didn't call it anything any different. They just kept calling it cider, the products that they kept putting out. So the name cider became synonymous with apple juice. And actually, if you go and you look at apple juice and cider in the U.S. are the same thing. I know the people that run Treetop. They're friends of mine, and you ask them, what's the difference between your juice that you market cider and then what you market apple juice? And there's no difference. There's none. Most people think that cider is just not filtered, but they have a filtered cider. It's crystal clear. It looks like the apple juice that's sitting next to it. It's just a matter of culture in the U.S. that we, I guess, yeah. People think of cider, they'll pay a little bit more for cider because they think of fresh pressed, on the farm, less adulterated, yeah.
So
but
if I see a label that says cider.
Yeah.
I can buy truly because there is no alcohol.
That's not the case now, because everything we make, usually it just says, like, our product just says apricot cider, or it just says cider. Usually it just says cider on it, most of them. This one, we took a poll of our consumers, and they said, we want you to call it hard cider.
Okay.
So they're not confused, basically. But this apple, particularly the one I'm holding in my hand, this one went from the most popular cider apple in the U.S. This is a Harrison, and it's an American apple. It came from Harrison, New Jersey, and it was found in the backyard of somebody in Harrison, New Jersey, just after our Constitution was signed. And then it was propagated because it made such a great cider. Became the #1 cider apple in the U.S. And then through the temperance movement, through Prohibition, it went from the most popular apple to one apple tree left in all of the U.S. In 1980 or so, somebody was searching for this apple because they read about it in books. And somebody in New Jersey still had an apple tree in their backyard, and he had been searching for it for a decade. Still had one apple tree left in their backyard, and they said, well, you can come get some scion, you can come get some wood from it, because we're going to cut it down in 2 weeks.
No way.
And so he did. He went from Virginia up to New Jersey, got a few sticks of scion wood, and sure enough, 2 weeks later, the tree was gone. If he hadn't found it, this tree would have disappeared. Now, we have about 5 acres of this. I don't know if there's much more of that grown in the U.S. There's a few other people that grow a few trees of this, but we've made a single varietal out of this, and does make a fantastic cider just on its own. This is, that apple's called Harrison. I'm actually going to put my coat on because I don't want to start shaking in front of you. But you know, the apple industry in the U.S. is dominated by Washington State, and really just about a 100-mile radius around here, and it's because of our climate. Our climate here, we only get about 7 inches of rain here in the Yakima Valley. We're a desert. We grow. There's cactus, there's scorpions, there's rattlesnakes, sagebrush, all that. Everything you find in a desert, we have here too, because we only get 7 inches of rain. If you go over the other side of the mountains, they get in some areas 180 inches of rain. Some of the wettest places on earth are on the west side of the state, and this side of the state is a desert, especially central Washington. That's one of the reasons why we grow better apples than anywhere else in the country, maybe in the world, is because we can control every drop of water those trees get. We haven't had any rain for 7 months in this valley. And everything, the other thing we have here is great soils and slope. And slope is important for air drainage. And so just like water, air drains to the lowest points. So cold air actually drains away from these sloping areas up here. So if we were down the valley bottom, down there, those are kind of cold pockets down there during what we would consider like bloom season, where we need to protect the blooms from that cold air. Up here on the slopes, we don't have to do as much mitigation for that cold air as they do down on the valley floors. The other thing we have here is soils. Apples will not grow in mud, in wet areas. Their roots need to be moist. They need to have good drainage, but they don't like to be wet. And so we're looking for sandy loam with a little bit of clay to it to plant trees in. My background is in horticulture. I grew up as a fourth-generation orchardist in the valley here, and then I got into winemaking. I've been making wine for about 20 years. So this kind of came together. I understood the horticulture side very well, and I understood the enology side very well, and so that's why I'm doing it. But I wouldn't do this if I wasn't a grower first. That's why we grow these apples, and we'll get into the apples in a little bit. These are Ambrosians. Some of these pointed out. These went through a crazy breeding program, a program that wanted the perfect shape of apple, perfect size, perfect texture, perfect amount of sugar, low acid, perfect amount of juice out of these apples, and that's why we can charge you $3 a pound for these things. Okay, because they're a beautiful apple. They're great for eating, but this is what we would consider a dessert apple or modern culinary apple. This is not only went through an intense breeding program, but it went through an intense marketing program, and they sell well. And there's only a certain amount of acreage these can be grown on. There's only a couple companies in all of U.S. that can actually sell these apples. They're a club apple. what we call a club, or they're patented. They went, so there's only a few people that can actually sell these to market, and that way we can produce scarcity. And so you'll pay more. Oh, ambrosia! I've only seen those a couple times. I'm going to buy one. I see it right now. So that's what we're doing with these modern apples. Basically, we're not really. We're trying to make as much money per acre on these as possible, and we're growing these so you have visually you can look at them and go, those look like a great apple, and when you bite into them, they're great to eat. These other apples that we grow aren't like that. I don't really care what they look like. Most of them. This is a Kingston Black. This is a traditional English variety. This has a little bit of bitter pit in it. You know, a lot of russet on it. Some of these have a lot of russet and cracking to them. You wouldn't want to eat this anyway. They're a little pithy.
Sorry, did you say Kingston?
This is called Kingston Black. These are a little pithy. These never went through a breeding program. A seed fell on the ground and a chance seedling grew up, and a guy named Kingston took the apple, made some cider out of it, and he said, wow, that tree makes great cider. I'm going to keep making cider out of it. And he shared it with a neighbor, and his neighbor's like, you're right, that is good cider. I want some scion wood from that tree, and I'm going to propagate some. So that's the breeding program traditionally in cider apples. There really hasn't been any kind of breeding program for cider themselves. It's all happened spontaneously. And the reason being, I'm not sure how much you know about apples, but apples have 5 seed pockets, and each seed pocket has 1 seed. And if I planted one of those seeds and grew it up as a seedling, it would not be a Harrison that came out of this apple. And if I planted all 5 of those seeds and they all 5 grew, none of them would be Harrison, and none of them would be a clone of the other one. They would all be different apples. And it's because apples are haploids, and some of them are triploids and some of them are diploids. And that means there's 2 chromosomes, just like humans, that come together and form. Not all of your kids look the same, right? They're not all clones, right? And that's the same thing. And that's the same thing that happens in an apple. And so that's why researchers say there's up to 12,000 different varieties of apples in the world. 4,000 of those have actually been identified. You can make cider out of any of those apples, but it's the ones that have fallen in someone's backyard, like this Harrison, grew up as a chance seedling, and they went, well, let's make cider out of it. If it made good cider, they kept it. If it didn't, they just chopped it off and got rid of it. This is a Dabinet. This is a traditional French apple. And this one is a Wixon crab. This was actually developed for flavor. It's a very intense apple. You guys can have a few if you want. High in bricks, so this is like most apples like this one. Tastes very sweet, but it's only about 12 bricks. This one is about 22 bricks. Very high sugar, very high acid, has some tannin to it, and it's kind of like eating wine grapes. Kind of like the difference between eating wine grapes and table grapes are kind of tepid. They're sweet, but wine grapes are very intense. But and that's why we grow these apples for cider. It's kind of the same idea of growing wine grapes and table grapes. You'll never find a mind-blowing Thompson seedless reserve out there. It doesn't exist. That grape will never produce a good wine. It will never produce it. And it's just like this apple will never produce a good cider on its own. I can blend a little bit of this into here and produce a much better cider, something that's memorable. And usually we never produce just a straight bittersweet or bitter sharp cider, because the bitterness, the tannins, are too intense for most people, and they go, well, it's memorable, but for the wrong reason. I use these apples that we grow to improve the ciders that we make, to make them better. And some of them, like...
If the ambrosia is such a nice, sweet apple,
yeah,
why wouldn't you make it? Because you can make more money putting it on the shelves in the supermarket.
Well, so sweetness is just sugar, right? It doesn't have all the other phenolic compounds like wine grapes have, and like these have. So, although this is good for eating, when you juice it, what you're really producing is just a sugar water. And when I ferment that, fermentation is pretty simple. It's yeast eat sugar and produce alcohol and carbon dioxide. And so once all the sugar is eaten up out of that, then you're just left with an alcoholic water instead of a sugar water, and that's what it tastes like. And so there's, it smells good now, but once you go through the fermentation process, you lose all that. And so, and that's the reason why I was kind of getting into the wine grape thing, is that's why we grow these. They add a certain complexity to ciders that you can't get from apples like this. It's not that we don't use apples like this. We use these as blending apples because these are very intense on their own. But to make a great cider, one that's memorable, one that you maybe just want to make as apples, like the cider, we have a cider maker's reserve over there. It's made from an Ashmead kernel, golden russet, which are heirloom apples, and then a few of these bittersweet and bitter sharp apples. And we've aged that a little bit in some barrel for a couple of years, and then bottle it. And that's more of a memorable cider than you're going to get from, let's say, just a cider that's come just straight from these apples. Not that we don't use them, but I can make something that's much more complex with these other ones.
So when you say barrel, you mean like French oak?
That particular one we use since it's my namesake. I did what I wanted with it, and so we put it in bourbon barrel for a couple of years actually. So it has another layer of complexity. You may get some of that bourbon note, like plum, maybe a little bit of leather, that kind of stuff out of it. It's pretty good. It's pretty good. So the whole idea about growing apples here, 70% of the nation's crop comes from within a 100-mile radius, from between Yakima and Tri-Cities and Wenatchee. 70%, it's a huge volume. It's like $3 billion worth of apples come from this area. And 90% of all the organic apples grown in the U.S. come from here. And that's because we have the perfect climate for that. Most other places, I did a little bit of consulting in horticulture, and I would go over to the west side of the mountains where people were trying to plant a few acres here and there, and they would go, I think researchers said I had apple anthracnose, and that was the first time I've ever heard. I thought it was like killing cattle or something out there. It was some kind of cankers were growing on the trees, and I went, I have no idea what that is, because I come from a dry climate where it doesn't grow. We don't have to deal with the mildew issues. We don't have to deal with some of these wet side issues that they have to use so much mitigation for. They have to put in so many inputs that at the end of the day their apples just cost more than ours, and we can grow better, more perfect apples than anywhere else in the country. And if we have less inputs, that means we're basically more sustainable. Our ground here, we don't have to use as much diesel. We don't have to use as many chemicals. We don't have to use as much labor. We don't have to do those sort of mitigation efforts that anywhere else in the country has to do to grow the same product. So that's what makes us so special here, is apples are meant to be grown here. Go ahead.
So do you do you put these in cold storage and make cider all year, or do you just make cider like crazy weather?
These ones we do not store for very long. You know, a couple weeks. This one's just getting waxy. What we want to do is get them. The apple itself actually produces its own wax. It pushes it out of its lenticels to protect it, so it can sit there longer, not dehydrate. But as soon as it gets waxy and starts putting out a fair amount of aroma, then we'll bring it out of cold storage and we'll let it sit for a couple more days until it even breaks down even more, produces more aroma. As those cell walls break down, the pectin in those cell walls break down, we get more phenolic compounds out of it. And that we're getting these are very special apples. Not a whole lot of people grow these. We have about 400 acres, and 50 of it is just to grow these things for cider. There's no one's going to eat this, okay? No one's going to buy that from a shelf. I mean, you put it up against that one, and come on, no one's going to buy that. So
it's meant from a production point of view.
Yeah.
Whether you
so these apples,
how you sell it.
Yeah.
You can sell to hipster people and say, okay, this is totally organic.
Yeah.
It's egg spontaneous.
And actually, 80% of our acreage is certified organic, and so we only grow a few things that aren't organic. Yeah, this is, but you know, these modern culinary apples, we do press those year round. Our press runs almost every day, and we press juice for other cideries. We press juice for other whatever that's going on. But we do press juice year round. We only press these for maybe a few months out of the year, starting basically next week on through December is when we'll get them basically all pressed. 50 acres produces a lot of apples. Takes a little while to get them all pressed. So in these, we actually categorize our apples into 4 different categories. There's sharps. So sharps are like Granny Smith, something that's very high acid. It's all based on acid and tannin. Then there's sweets. This would be considered a sweet, low acid apple, easy to eat. Then we have bitter sharps and bitter sweets. A bitter sharp, the bitter means it has tannin. And a Kingston Black would be a bitter sharp. It has tannin and it's high in acid. A Dabinet is a bitter sweet. It has tannin and it's low in acid. So if I took a bite of this, I could sense that kind of gum drying, mouth drying tannin to it, but it wouldn't have much acid, wouldn't give much kick. This one would. This one would give you that acid background to it. So these 2 apples are actually they're good to blend together because one produces a good amount of acid. This one has some other characteristics that this one doesn't have, like the aroma in this one and the juice that this produces has kind of a nutty characteristic to it, almost like hazelnut. This one is more on the sharp side. It produces more of a citrusy kind of aroma and flavor. So if you put these 2 together, you get a more complex style of cider. But saying that, this is a Wixon crab. We kind of talked about that. This came from a breeding program in California. They're trying to make a really intense apple. We're starting to do some single varietal apples, and or single varietal ciders, I should say. So this one, we'll try this one. I just brought it in growlers because it is only available in draft. The other cider that you can have with dinner is in bottle. That's the Cider Maker's Reserve. This is a single varietal. The varietal is called Ashmead's Kernel. It's a traditional dual-purpose apple from England. Dual-purpose means you can eat it, and well, it's actually good for baking. I made some apple pie out of it last year. It was the best apple pie I ever had. I thought my mom's was, but I took one over for Thanksgiving, and she wouldn't admit it, but I could see it on her face. Ashmead's Kernel.
You're not invited this year.
Yeah, not invited.
So kernel like Kernel? Or
yeah, Kernel. Okay. And kernel is another term used for a wild or a chance seedling. So you have crab, pippin, and kernel all mean a chance seedling that pops up. So we can try that one. Does everybody have a glass? You want a new glass? I have one that doesn't have beer. Doesn't have beer in it. I have a few extra. What we're trying to do, we've gotten to the point in the cider industry, I think, that people are understanding the difference between, let's say, small craft regional cideries like us than they are with the larger Angry Orchards, Woodchuck, Crispin cideries. Those cideries they're not really using these apples. Woodchuck, or I should say, Angry Orchards has a place in New York now. They bought a small
Crispin
orchard.
Is just above us, actually.
In Colfax?
Yeah.
They just shut it down, actually.
Did they?
Mm-hmm.
No, they still sell it at the store.
No, they sell it, but they shut down that facility, and 60 people lost their jobs from it.
Yeah, they were a pretty tiny cider place, actually.
They were actually owned by Coors. The original owner I'm friends with, he actually has a place in Sullivan, Washington, which is down on the Columbia River, and he does some contract work now.
We have another cider place near us called Commons. If you've heard of Commons,
I think I have. Yeah,
they're up near Crispin.
Yeah. Okay.
They're a little bit below Crispin. They're in Auburn. Yeah, Asian lady.
So this is the apple. This apple itself, we would typically blend it out with something else because it's very high in acid, and so we had to leave a little bit of residual sugar in here. There's like 2.8% residual sugar. The acid's very high. It's about 8.5, 9 grams per liter, which would be fairly high acid for a grape also. Usually we're looking for grams per liter between 5 and 7. This is a little bit higher than that, so it's much more intense. Aromas to me on this kind of differ between kind of a watermelon kind of aromas to maybe...
Can I have one?
Oh yeah, here we go.
Do you have a bin for this, a trash?
I can take it. Yeah, I have one back here.
Thank you.
But to me, it's a pretty intense site. We're doing this to show people. What I was getting at, the industry now is at a point where people are kind of getting cider. They understand it. And actually in the Northwest, we drink more cider per capita in the Northwest than anywhere else in the country. And most of the country, cider constitutes about 2% of the total volume of alcohol beverage. In the Northwest, it's between 6 and 8% of the alcohol industry. And so, 10 years ago, there was only about 6 cideries in the Northwest, including us. Now there's over 100. But we're kind of in a bubble here, where we have all these fresh products. We have fresh vegetables and fruit from the Yakima Valley. We have beef. We have wine, beers. There's over 300 breweries in Seattle. There's like almost close to 400 in Portland. So we're in this area of the country where actually regional cideries outsell these large brands like Angry Orchards and Woodchucks and those ones. Everywhere else in the country, those big brands outsell the small brands, but here in the Northwest, it's different. And it's just a matter of we're used to walking down the street to the nearest brewery and going, oh, that's my neighborhood brewery, not just my neighborhood bar or neighborhood anything. It's my neighborhood brewery. So we're getting to the point where people are asking us, like, what does a Dabinet taste like? They don't know what a Dabinet is yet, but we're going to show them in the next couple of years. This was a Ashmead's Kernel. Next year we're going to do a Harrison and a single varietal. We'll do a Golden Russet single varietal. Once we get...
What was this one?
This one was Ashmead's Kernel. And so...
What's the ABV on this one?
This one is about 7.4, because when it warms up a little bit, it's starting to warm up a little bit here, so it feels a little... Well, it feels a little warmer.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's getting a little hot. Once ciders are so delicate, once they reach about 8, to me, they get too hot. There's too much alcohol, because there's in wine and beers, I kind of term them as like a layer cake. Wine can have 50, 60 different layers, and if you mess up one of those and you fix it soon enough, you may just come up with another interesting layer. Cider only has about 5 layers, and so if you mess one of those layers up, then chances of fixing it and making a great cider or memorable one doesn't really happen very well. And usually, we haven't done it a lot. Those ciders just go to the distillery and come back as brandy because they're very hard to fix. It's a very delicate process, and we have to be more stringent. I made wine for a decade before I started making cider, and I thought going over to cider was like, oh, this is going to be easy. I'm just making a fruit wine, whatever. Apples are apples are apples. I grew up in the apple industry. And the truth is, it's a little bit more difficult. Anybody can make cider, but to make a good cider is difficult because I have to take these apples, and it's just like wine, they're different every year. The bricks in this apple is going to be different this year than it was last year, than it is going to be next year, based on just the climate.
So how do you check for the bricks then?
The bricks on these, we'll cut these,
okay.
Squeeze out the juice.
Okay. Into the aspect, whatever that thing.
Yeah, and then we'll check them that way out in the field.
Just like grapes.
Just like grapes. The difference is between these, you can't let these hang longer and they just get more sugar in them. You have your chance to get the potential sugar out of these is over the course of the growing season. That whole growing season, the tree is pumping these apples as much with starch. They're developing starch in these apples, and as soon as our daylight hours start shrinking, so we go from 16 hours of daylight a day in the middle of the summer to now we're down to about 11 hours now. They start ripening, and ripening in an apple is turning starch to sugar. And so you've already developed, by the time this starts ripening, you've already developed all the starch that's going to be in there. Your potential sugar is already there. So let's say last year we had 30 straight days of 100-degree weather. And in 100 degrees, apple trees just kind of like to hunker down. They don't do much. They stop respiring or respiring, and their photosynthesis kind of starts shutting down. That prevents the apple from building up enough starch. Our bricks were a lot lower than they were this year. This year we only had a couple days over 100 degrees, and our bricks are a lot higher. And actually, we did a study with WSU a few years ago. It was a four-year process, and they wanted to see what the difference was between our apples and apples grown over on the Olympic Peninsula and the ones grown in other areas of the state and country. And they found that our apples here typically had more sugar, they had more acid, and they had more phenolic compounds here. And it's because apples, they like sunlight. They like a lot of it. And we have 300 days of sunshine here a year, and in Port Townsend has more like 300 gloomy days a year. So they don't get as much sunlight hours as we do. They don't have as much potential to grow and develop those flavors and sugar and acid as we do here. And that's the difference between growing in a region that grows great apples and a region that fails to grow good apples.
So we have this. So we have a place called Apple Hill where we live. It's up in Placerville, not too far. So we go up there right now. It's you can buy pie, donuts, and it's cool.
Yeah.
We buy the big
unpasteurized
jugs of cider.
Yeah.
I love apple juice. So one goes in the fridge, and Rebecca. So she thinks she's making cider, so she'll put it in the garage, still
It ferments.
and it will like blow up. So we go out there every day and burp it.
Yeah.
And this is like a week and a half. And is that going to be alcoholic?
Oh yeah, definitely, 100%.
And even when the lid is on it,
yeah,
That's why the lid pops off.
because it's already got that yeast up there when they were pressing it. And
Yep. If they haven't pasteurized it, even if they have pasteurized it, let's say Treetop. They press hundreds of thousands of gallons of juice, and they keep it in large tanks. But every 2 weeks, they have to repasteurize, even if it's kept cold. They have to repasteurize that juice because you just can't keep apple juice. It's like the perfect medium for juice,
producing alcohol.
for producing alcohol.
So if we leave it in there for like 2 weeks and the colour changes, it gets really dark.
Yeah.
You can sell this. And we burp it.
Yeah.
What do you think the alcohol content of it is?
Depends on what the sugar level. If they're pressing from culinary apples like this, you're probably around 7%, something like that. Yeah, that's pretty typical.
Okay, you're right.
Well, growing up, my dad was always, if it gets tangy, girls, don't drink it. We're like, right.
So it's like the grapes, there is yeast on the skin.
Yeah, there's yeast on the skin. There's yeast everywhere. And so we actually use a blend of 3 different yeasts. There's 2 proprietary wild yeasts that we use, and then there's 1 Saccharomyces yeast that finishes the fermentation off. So we use those wild yeasts to kind of build up some structure that we want. We feel that it provides more mouthfeel. And then we finish it off with a Saccharomyces yeast, basically. Just a kind of a champagne yeast to make sure it goes to the end. Yeah. It's the same process. I mean, we're making white wines is what we're making, basically. Only we're deriving our juice from apples rather than from grapes.
So can we find your product down in California?
You can.
Yeah. Select stores.
We used to be a lot bigger in California. We've kind of shrunk down. We've focused more of our efforts in Washington, Oregon in the last year or 2. So you're
just outside Sacramento.
Okay. We used to be in Nugget Market.
Okay. Yeah,
around that.
Yep.
Around that and Rayleigh's.
I was going to say Rayleigh's has probably got it.
Rayleigh, we've worked back and forth with Rayleigh's. They were going to take a lot. We have other canned products like this, and they were going to take quite a few of those into that Northern California area. We're still working on that program, but you should see them here in the next few months.
Cool. Which one is this one?
That one is Ashmead's Kernel.
I took the right picture.
Yeah.
That apple's not here, right?
That apple is not here. It's a golden apple, kind of like this. It's not quite this. It's a golden apple. Looks like this color, but it's about this shape. It has more of this russet on it. Russet is this right here.
Okay.
So it has a little bit of russet on it. It's not a pretty apple, but it makes. If you live in California, you'll see them we pack a lot of these and send them to Whole Foods in California, and they sell like hotcakes. So we haven't picked them yet, so it'll probably be 30 days before we send them to California.
Which one? Which is that one?
That's Ashmead's Kernel. That's the one that made this cider.
Okay.
They'll be in the store. Make your apple pies with them this fall.
Okay.
You said Whole Foods has them?
Whole Foods will have them this fall.
Okay.
Yep. They're sold into California.
And they'll be from Yakima Valley.
They'll be from Yakima, yeah.
When you make the ice wine,
Yeah.
do you freeze the fruit or do you wait the fruit to freeze on the
So here's
the tree like Germans?
Here's a problem with that. Yakima it only in the winter it only freezes usually for a few hours out of the day, and we can't. Usually don't get 3, 4, 10 days in a row of freezing weather. So what we have done is we've done it 2 processes. Now we've taken bins of apples and just sent them to the freezer and frozen them, and we've picked a day that's like 28 degrees out to press them. We've done it that way, and it has to be 28 degrees for a few days in a row to get the apples at the right perfect temperatures.
18 Celsius, minus 18 Celsius.
28 degrees would be like -2 Celsius, something like -2, -3. And then, but we've done it another way where we've frozen the juice, and then that's not a traditional way, and then and then drained it off. So and that's why we don't call it ice cider. It's not, on the label. It's actually called frost, and so because we can't in this region apples don't freeze on the tree. To call it ice wine in the United States, it has to freeze on the vine when you pick it, and it doesn't. Ours doesn't. So we don't call it ice cider or ice wine. We have our own fanciful name for it. We call it frost. Yeah.
It's sort of the hip hop artists say when they got all their jewelry on, you're frosted. When they got all their diamonds
So you can
on.
have like 70% of the market, or percent 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 of the market, or percent.